Welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a subject I think you're going to be pretty interested in. It's happiness, but not just the fleeting kind of happiness. We're talking about deep, lasting contentment, the kind of feeling that makes life feel truly fulfilling. We've got this fascinating guide for our journey today. It's a book called The Art of Happiness. It's co-authored by the Dalai Lama and psychiatrist Cutler. So you're getting this really cool blend of like ancient wisdom and modern science. I can't wait to dig in.
Yeah, it's a really unique approach, isn't it? You get that spiritual perspective from the Dalai Lama, but also the grounded scientific insights from Cutler's background as a psychiatrist.
Exactly. And the book starts off by tackling a question that I think we all ponder at some point. What's the purpose of life? I mean, philosophers have been debating this for centuries, but both Aristotle and the Dalai Lama, they actually kind of land on the same answer. And that's the pursuit of happiness. So are we all just chasing butterflies, hoping they'll land on our shoulders?
Well, the book quickly challenges that oversimplified idea. It's not just about these fleeting moments of pleasure, like winning the lottery or indulging in some delicious dessert. It goes much deeper than that.
Right. And the book actually tells this story about the author's friend who received this huge financial windfall. Naturally, she was on cloud nine at first, but then after a while, her happiness level returned to what it was before she got all that money. Like her happiness set point, that baseline level we each kind of have, snapped back into place. I wonder if that's ever happened to you, like after a promotion or a big vacation, the initial euphoria kind of fades and you find yourself back where you started.
It's a common experience, and it highlights the fact that happiness isn't solely determined by these external factors, like wealth or possessions. The book digs into that idea of the set point a little bit, suggesting that it might be partly influenced by genetics. But here's the encouraging part. It's not a life sentence.
Okay, so our happiness set point, it might be somewhat predetermined, but thankfully the book doesn't leave us feeling trapped. What I thought was so fascinating was this idea that we can actually train our minds for happiness.
Yeah.
Just like we hit the gym to train our bodies.
Absolutely. And that training involves understanding two key things. First, we need to identify what truly contributes to lasting happiness, moving beyond those fleeting pleasures that give us that quick hit, but don't have any staying power.
And that's where the book gets really interesting. It talks about this importance of aligning our actions with our deeper values. There's a story in there about a therapist's friend who was really struggling with a job offer. The job was in this beautiful town that she loved, but the work itself wasn't really fulfilling. She was tempted by that surface level pleasure of living in this really idyllic place. But deep down, she knew that it wouldn't really lead to genuine happiness.
Yeah, that story really resonated with me. It's so easy to get caught up in those external factors, but ultimately it's about finding alignment between what we do and who we are.
It makes you wonder, are we sometimes chasing the wrong butterflies? Maybe true happiness comes from aligning our passions with our purpose and finding that sweet spot where our actions feel meaningful and fulfilling.
That's a great insight. And that brings us to the second part of training our minds for happiness, cultivating specific mental states that support well-being. The book really emphasizes the importance of qualities like compassion, kindness, and contentment.
That's interesting. At first glance, it might seem a little counterintuitive. Why would focusing on others, through compassion and kindness, why would that lead to my own happiness? It almost feels like we're wired to prioritize our own needs and desires.
It's a common question, and the book tackles it head-on. The Dalai Lama explains that there's this really profound difference between self-pitying suffering, which keeps us trapped in our own negativity, and the kind of suffering we experience through compassion. He uses this powerful metaphor. Imagine being crushed under a heavy weight, that's like our own suffering. But then imagine carrying something heavy for someone you care about. It's still a burden, but it feels different, right?
I see what you mean. It's like the motivation shifts from self-preservation to a genuine desire to help. It's less about me and more about us.
Exactly. And that shift in perspective, that willingness to step outside of our own self-centeredness can actually reduce our own suffering and increase our capacity for joy.
I'm starting to see how these pieces fit together. It's not about ignoring our own needs. It's about expanding our sense of self to include the well-being of others. And the book suggests that this expansion, this act of connecting with something larger than ourselves, is actually a key ingredient in lasting happiness.
You're getting it. The book really dives deep into this idea, exploring the interconnectedness of our happiness and the happiness of those around us.
It makes me think about those times when I felt most fulfilled. Often it's been after helping someone or contributing to a cause that I care about. It's like that warm feeling you get when you do something kind for someone.
Yeah.
And it kind of lifts their spirits as well as yours.
That's a perfect example of the kind of happiness the book is talking about. It's not just about seeking pleasure or avoiding pain. It's about cultivating this deep sense of purpose and connection. And the book suggests that one of the most powerful ways to do that is through developing compassion.
So we're talking about compassion as more than just a feel-good emotion. It's like a muscle we can strengthen, a skill we can hone. And the more we develop it, the more we tap into this deeper source of happiness that's less about external circumstances and more about our internal state of being.
Precisely. It's about shifting our focus from what can I get to what can I give. And the book argues that this shift is not only beneficial for others, but it's also essential for our own well-being.
So how do we start cultivating compassion in a way that feels authentic and sustainable? The book mentions some specific techniques or practices, right?
Yes, absolutely. And that's where things get really practical and applicable. The book goes beyond just talking about compassion in theory. It provides really concrete strategies for bringing it into our daily lives.
I'm eager to hear about those strategies because, it's one thing to intellectually grasp the concept of compassion, but it's another thing to actually embody it in our thoughts, words, and actions.
You're right. And that's what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive. We'll look at some of those specific practices the book recommends for cultivating compassion, as well as some of the challenges and obstacles we might encounter along the way.
This is getting really interesting. I'm starting to see how this journey towards lasting happiness is less about chasing those external rewards and more about developing internal qualities like compassion. And I'm ready to dive deeper into the practical side of things. But for now, let's pause here and give you, the listener, a moment to reflect. What are your initial thoughts about this idea of cultivating compassion as a pathway to happiness? Have you ever experienced that connection between helping others and feeling a sense of joy or fulfillment yourself? Take a moment to ponder that as we get ready to explore those actionable steps for bringing more compassion into our lives. All right, we're back. Before the break, we were starting to unpack this idea of compassion as a key ingredient for lasting happiness. As discussed in The Art of Happiness, it's a fascinating concept, but I have to admit it raises some questions for me. If we're naturally wired for self-preservation, how do we shift gears to genuinely care about the suffering of others?
That's a great point. And the book acknowledges that this shift in perspective doesn't always come naturally. It takes conscious effort and practice. But here's where the book gets really insightful. It dives into the potential pitfalls of a life lacking compassion.
Oh, this is where the story of Stalin comes in, right? It's one of those memorable examples in the book.
Exactly. The book uses Stalin as an example of what can happen when compassion is absent. It portrays him as someone consumed by paranoia and distrust, constantly surrounded by enemies, both real and imagined.
It's a chilling example. He had immense power, yet he seemed utterly incapable of experiencing genuine happiness or connection. It makes you wonder, did his lack of compassion contribute to his own inner turmoil?
The book certainly suggests that possibility. It highlights this idea that when we shut ourselves off from compassion, we create a kind of prison for ourselves, a prison of isolation and fear.
So it's not just about being nice to others. It's about recognizing the impact compassion, or the lack thereof, has on our own well-being.
Precisely. And the book contrasts Stalin's story with examples of individuals who embody compassion and experience its positive effects. One anecdote that really struck me was when the author, a psychiatrist, confessed his own anxieties to the Dalai Lama.
The psychiatrist was admitting his anxieties to the Dalai Lama. That's pretty humbling. I can imagine how nerve-wracking that must have been.
Right. But here's the thing. The Dalai Lama's response was incredibly compassionate and understanding. It wasn't about judgment or offering some quick fixes. It was about acknowledging the universality of human struggle and offering support.
That's a powerful example. It shows that compassion doesn't require us to be perfect or have all the answers. It's about simply showing up for others with empathy and understanding.
And that can be as simple as offering a kind word to a stranger or lending a listening ear to a friend in need. The book emphasizes that even small acts of kindness can have a ripple effect, creating a more compassionate and connected world.
There's that anecdote about the college student who was so nervous about a presentation, and a simple act of kindness from a classmate helped ease his anxiety. It's a great reminder that we don't need grand gestures to make a difference.
Absolutely. It's about those everyday moments where we choose kindness over indifference, connection over isolation. And the more we practice compassion in our daily lives, the more we strengthen that muscle. and create a positive feedback loop.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture. But let's be honest, life isn't always sunshine and roses. How does this idea of compassion hold up when we're facing real challenges like grief, loss, or disappointment?
That's where the book takes a fascinating turn. It acknowledges that suffering is an inevitable part of life. We all experience it in different forms and intensities. But the key, according to the Dalai Lama, is how we relate to our suffering.
I remember this incredible story from the book about a woman named Kisa Gotami who lost her child. She went from person to person, desperately seeking a cure for death itself.
That story is so poignant, isn't it? It captures that raw, primal grief we experience when faced with loss. And the book uses it to illustrate a common human tendency, to view our suffering as unique and unfair.
Right. It's like, why me? But the book challenges that perspective, encouraging us to see suffering as a universal experience, a natural part of the human condition.
And that's where the concept of karma comes in. Now, I know the word karma can sometimes evoke images of cosmic punishment or some kind of scorecard for good and bad deeds, but the book presents a more nuanced perspective.
Okay, so how does The Art of Happiness define karma? Because I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on how it fits into this whole conversation about compassion and happiness.
The book explains that karma is less about fatalism and more about understanding that our actions have consequences. It's not about being punished or rewarded. It's about recognizing the interconnectedness of everything we do, say, and think.
So it's less about what goes around comes around, and more about understanding the ripple effects of our choices.
Exactly. And the book emphasizes that this understanding can actually be empowering. It means we have the ability to influence our future experiences through our present actions.
That's a much more hopeful perspective than the idea of being trapped by some predetermined fate. But let's be real. It's easy to fall into the blame game when things go wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I have definitely caught myself personalizing situations, like getting frustrated over bad service at a restaurant and making it all about me.
The book actually addresses that tendency head on. There's a hilarious anecdote about the author having a similar experience at a restaurant, getting all worked up over slow service. It's a reminder that we all fall into that trap of personalization and blame, which just amplifies our suffering.
It's so relatable. But the book challenges us to take a step back and find meaning in those challenging moments. It's about shifting from a victim mentality to a growth mindset, recognizing that even difficult experiences can offer opportunities for learning and growth.
And that brings us to a really powerful concept in the book, the idea of transforming suffering. It's not about pretending that suffering doesn't exist or trying to force ourselves to be happy all the time. It's about acknowledging the pain, but also recognizing its potential for transformation.
You mean like how a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly? It has to go through this period of intense change and even struggle to emerge as something beautiful and free.
That's a great analogy, and the book provides real-life examples of how people have transformed their suffering into something meaningful. There's the story of Robert, a man who battled severe depression. But through that struggle, he developed a deeper connection with his wife.
It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there can be growth and positive transformation. It's like finding those diamonds in the rough.
Exactly. And the book doesn't just leave us with these inspiring stories. It offers a practical framework for overcoming obstacles and cultivating lasting change. The Dalai Lama outlines a 4-step process, and I think it's incredibly valuable.
Okay, let's break down those 4 steps. What's the first one?
The first step is learning and understanding why change is necessary. It's about recognizing the patterns in our lives that lead to suffering and understanding the benefits of shifting those patterns.
That makes sense. It's like before we can embark on a journey, we need to know where we're going and why it matters. So once we've identified the need for change, what comes next?
The second step is developing conviction. Truly believing that change is possible. This is where we tap into that sense of hope and possibility, reminding ourselves that we're not stuck.
Conviction. It's about shifting from a mindset of I can't to I can, or maybe even I will. But I imagine that maintaining that belief can be tough, especially when faced with setbacks or challenges.
You're right, and that's where the third step comes in, determination. This is about making a firm commitment to the change we want to create. It's about staying the course even when things get tough, knowing that the journey won't always be easy.
Okay, so we've got learning, conviction, and determination. What's the final step in this process of change?
The final step, and perhaps the most crucial one, is action. It's about consistently putting in the effort, making those small daily choices that align with our desired change.
So it's not enough to just think about change or even believe in it. We have to actively participate in creating it. But how do we maintain that momentum, that enthusiasm for change, especially when life gets busy or our motivation starts to wane?
That's a great question, and the book offers a really interesting analogy to illustrate this point: a natural disaster.
A natural disaster. That seems a bit intense. How does that relate to personal change?
But think about it. Often after a natural disaster, people come together with this renewed sense of purpose and urgency. They're willing to put in the effort, make sacrifices, and work collaboratively towards a common goal.
I see what you mean. It's like the crisis creates this shared sense of motivation and determination. So are you suggesting that we need a personal earthquake to kickstart our efforts towards change?
Not necessarily. The point is we can cultivate that same sense of urgency and enthusiasm in our own lives, even without a major crisis. It's about tapping into that inner drive, that desire for growth and transformation, and channeling it into consistent action.
Okay, so we've explored the Dalai Lama's four-step process for change: learning, conviction, determination, and action. But let's face it, even with the best intentions, we're bound to encounter some inner resistance. How do we deal with those negative thoughts and emotions that inevitably creep in and try to sabotage our efforts?
That's where the book introduces the concept of mental combat. Now, it's not about suppressing those negative emotions or pretending they don't exist. It's about actively engaging with them, using reason and perspective to weaken their grip.
It sounds like we need to become inner warriors, ready to face those negative thought patterns head on. But how do we actually fight those battles in a way that's constructive and compassionate, rather than just creating more inner turmoil?
That's a fantastic question, and it's something we'll delve into. In the next part of our deep dive, we'll explore some of the specific techniques the book recommends for managing negative emotions and cultivating a more peaceful and balanced inner state.
This is getting really exciting. We've covered a lot of ground so far, exploring this profound connection between compassion and happiness, the importance of transforming suffering, and the practical steps for creating lasting change. But there's still so much more to unpack. So stick with us as we continue our deep dive into the art of happiness and discover how we can apply these principles in our own lives. Welcome back to our deep dive into the art of happiness. We've been exploring how cultivating compassion can lead to lasting happiness and how to navigate those inevitable challenges and suffering we encounter along the way. But as we all know, those negative thoughts and emotions can be pretty persistent. It's like they have this VIP pass to our inner world, showing up uninvited and wreaking havoc on our peace of mind.
Oh, it's so true. The book acknowledges that, those negative thoughts and emotions are just part of the human experience, but it emphasizes that we don't have to be ruled by them.
Right. It's not about becoming some kind of emotionless robot. It's about learning to manage those difficult feelings in a way that empowers us rather than disempowers us.
Exactly. And remember that concept of mental combat we talked about earlier. The book goes deeper into this, providing some specific techniques for challenging those negative thought patterns.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me the battle plan. How do we actually engage in this mental combat in a way that's effective and compassionate?
Well, one technique the book highlights is using reason and logic to examine the validity of our negative thoughts. It's about asking ourselves, is this thought really true? What evidence do I have to support it?
It's like putting those negative thoughts on trial, cross-examining them to see if they really hold up under scrutiny.
Exactly. Often when we shine the light of awareness on those negative thoughts, we realize they're based on assumptions or distorted perceptions rather than objective reality.
Oh, I see. I can see how that would be helpful. It's like taking away their power by exposing them as imposters. But what about those times when our negative thoughts are rooted in real, legitimate concerns?
That's where the book suggests shifting our perspective. It's not about denying the reality of the situation, but rather looking for a more balanced and constructive viewpoint.
Okay, give me an example. Let's say I'm facing this really challenging situation at work. How do I shift my perspective without simply sticking my head in the sand and pretending everything is fine?
Well, instead of getting caught up in all the drama and negativity, you could ask yourself, what can I learn from this experience? How can I use this challenge as an opportunity for growth?
It's about reframing the situation.
Yeah.
Finding the silver lining, even if it's initially hidden beneath some pretty dark clouds.
Precisely. And the book emphasizes that this process of reframing takes practice. It's like building a muscle. The more we do it, the stronger we become at challenging those automatic negative thought patterns and choosing a more empowering perspective.
So we've talked about using reason and perspective to manage those challenging emotions. Are there any other techniques the book recommends?
The book also emphasizes the importance of mindfulness and meditation. These practices help us develop a greater awareness of our thoughts and emotions, allowing us to observe them without getting swept away by them.
I've dabbled in meditation, but I sometimes struggle with it. My mind tends to race with thoughts, and it can feel pretty frustrating. Any tips for someone who's new to meditation or struggles to quiet their mind?
The book acknowledges that meditation takes practice. It's not about emptying the mind completely. It's about learning to observe our thoughts without judgment, like watching clouds drift by.
So it's more about becoming an observer of our thoughts rather than a prisoner to them.
Exactly. And even a few minutes of daily meditation can make a difference. The book provides some simple guided meditations to get you started.
That's encouraging. It makes meditation feel more approachable. It's not about becoming a Zen master overnight. It's about taking those small, consistent steps.
And remember, compassion plays a crucial role in this process. It's about extending that same kindness and understanding to ourselves that we offer to others.
That's a powerful reminder. We often hold ourselves to impossibly high standards and beat ourselves up when we fall short.
And that kind of self-criticism just adds to our suffering. The book encourages us to treat ourselves with the same gentleness and compassion we would offer to a dear friend.
This conversation is bringing to mind a question the book poses. Should we love ourselves even more? It seems a bit counterintuitive at first, but I'm starting to see the wisdom in it.
It's a fascinating question, isn't it? It challenges that common notion that self-love is selfish or narcissistic.
Right. It's about recognizing our inherent worth and treating ourselves with the same kindness and compassion we offer to others.
It's a powerful idea, and it connects back to the core message of the book, that cultivating compassion, both for ourselves and for others, is the key to unlocking lasting happiness.
It's not about seeking happiness as some external reward or achievement. It's about cultivating an inner state of being, a way of relating to ourselves and the world. That fosters joy, peace, and fulfillment.
And that's a journey we can all embark on. Regardless of our circumstances or past experiences, the art of happiness provides a roadmap, a set of tools and practices we can use to navigate those inevitable ups and downs of life and cultivate a deeper sense of well-being.
Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the art of happiness. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the power of compassion to the importance of transforming suffering and practical techniques for cultivating lasting change. If you're intrigued by these concepts, we highly recommend exploring the book yourself. It's full of even more insights and practical advice.
It's a truly enriching read.
And remember, the journey towards happiness is ongoing. It's about those small daily choices we make, the moments where we choose kindness over judgment, connection over isolation, and compassion over fear. Keep practicing, keep exploring, and keep cultivating that inner light. That shines brightly within each of us. Until next time, keep diving deep.